Hello dan Assalamualaikum. Today we will talk about enzyme inhibition. First, we will talk about competitive inhibition. First, as the substrate try to react with enzyme, the inhibitor has more affinity with the enzyme. The inhibitor will bind to the active site of the enzyme and create enzyme inhibitor complex. So, the substrate cannot bind with the enzyme, and the enzyme substrate affinity goes down while the enzyme inhibitor goes up. In this case, we are not making enough enzyme substrate. The only way that this reaction can go on is to add more substrate concentration so that the affinity of inhibition with enzyme will go down. The inhibition will be outbid so that more enzyme substrate complex can be produced, and next will be dissociate to form more product. Km is equal to the substrate concentration. So we can say that when the substrate concentration increase, so that the Km or the affinity will increase, while Vmax remains unaffected because the amount of product is not changed. Next is non-competitive inhibition. The inhibitor will bind to the other side of the enzyme but won't bind to the active site of the enzyme. The site is called allosteric site. It will produce enzyme inhibition complex, but this complex can still react with substrate, and the substrate will bind to the active site of the enzyme. So it will produce the enzyme substrate inhibitor complex. This complex can never be converted to product, but in some possible way, the inhibitor can be released from the ESI complex so that they can produce more enzyme substrate complex. Then the reaction can occur and produce product. Because there is two ways for the enzyme substrate complex to produce, the equilibrium is not thrown off. We did not change the Km, so the Km remained unaffected. The enzyme substrate inhibitor or ESI complex can form enzyme substrate complex and can form product, but at some point not all the ESI complex can form the ES complex. In other words, you won't be able to have all your enzyme to react with substrate. This means that the Vmax is decreased because we can reach Vmax. The third one is the uncompetitive inhibition. When the substrate bind to the active site of the enzyme and form enzyme substrate complex, it will be then that the ES complex open the allosteric site so that the inhibitor can bind to the allosteric site in ES complex. It will form a ESI complex. There will be no product formed from this complex. It is also possible that the ESI complex can release the inhibitor from the ESI complex to form ES complex, which can progress to form product. When more ES complex bind to inhibitor, the concentration of ES complex decrease. As the reaction start to shift right, according to the Chatelier's principle, the concentration of substrate will decrease, so the Km will decrease. At some point, not all the ESI complex can form the ES complex. In other words, you won't be able to have all your enzyme to react with substrate. This means that Vmax is decreased because we can reach Vmax.